Good old November in Algonquin Park. I decided to do one last hurrah to work on my new developed campground project. My friend Dan would be joining me too, making this my first non-solo overnight camping trip in 3 years. Our plan was to camp at the Mule Lake campground for a few nights. We would spend the days working on the campground project, and during the evenings we would relax around the campsite. We snagged a reservation for the last dog-friendly, non-hydro campsite on the non-highway side of the campground. Mule Lake, campsite number 84. Before leaving for the trip, the forecast was calling for daytime highs of 7 degrees on Friday, 5 degrees on Saturday, and 5 degrees on Sunday, with a feels-like temperature of 3 degrees for each of those days. It was calling for sunny skies for all 3 days too. Of course, being November, none of those forecasts ended up being accurate. Each day was a few degrees colder, with a total of maybe 3 hours of sunshine the entire trip. It was going to be consistently cold the entire time. And on top of the cold temperatures was heavy wind and rain for the first evening. The wind was going to reach 35 kilometers per hour, with total rainfall of 5 to 10 millimeters. Thankfully, this was only forecasted for the first night. The second night was going to be a lot colder, with a feels like minus 7 degrees overnight, but at least it wouldn't have the same wind and rain. I brought my new Mech Home 4 tent. I'd purchased this tent a few months earlier while it was on sale, but this was going to be my first time using it. For ground insulation, I brought interlocking foam tiles to cover the entire floor of the tent. On top of the foam tiles, I placed an unzipped sleeping bag as a ground sheet. I purchased a pop-up kennel for Elo to go inside of the tent, on top of the ground insulation. I wrapped it with 2 fleece blankets, which was the most weight that the lightweight kennel could withstand before toppling over. And then I put an additional blanket on the inside bottom of the kennel. The pop-up kennel would be her little cocoon of warmth and insulation. I wanted to make sure with absolute certainty that she was going to be comfortable. For myself, I was using my Sea to Summit Etherlite XT insulated sleeping pad, which has an R value of 3.5, and then put my winter sleeping bag on top of that whole setup. After pitching my tent, Dan and I headed off towards Rock Lake. We worked our way through Campground A, documenting all of the sites and doing a second walkthrough for GoPro footage and general campground photos. Next, we went to Campground B. We only did the first walkthrough to grab the photos. We decided not to do the second walkthrough for GoPro footage. The forecast was calling for rain to start at around 4 p.m. and we didn't want to get caught midway, so we decided to wrap up the day early. The temperature was hovering around 0 degrees during the early evening, but it felt significantly colder with the wind and the rain. I took Elo for one last walk, and then I got into the tent at around 10 p.m. I knew that the morning was going to be freezing cold, so I planned to go for a drive right after I woke up. I drove to the gas station in Whitney to fill my gas tank, and then to Opionga Road. I saw some grouse and geese. The geese photographed really nicely in the morning fog with the Opiongo store in the background. I was able to capture some nice landscape photos too. After my morning drive, I headed back to the campground for a little while. I played with Elo, made myself morning coffee, and just relaxed for a bit before getting back to work on the campground project. Dan headed to the Lake of Two Rivers campground to start documenting those campsites in the meantime. Oh, Elo, you silly girl. Oh, you're so silly, Elo. You're so silly. I have her tethered between two trees with a swivel carabiner attached to her leash. And this is my buddy that I'm with, his tent, his car, his tarp that he pitched. He was here Thursday night, a day before I got here, so he set up, put his tarp over the bench, got Elo's water bowl. I'm just making myself a quick coffee. New 4-person tent, the Mech Ohm. Yeah, it's very spacious inside, which is nice when I'm with Elo. You see all this water on my tent? Well, you're wrong. It's not water. It's ice. It is all ice because it is so cold. It's a pretty nice site for, like, relatively speaking. Got a big driveway, so water access here. A beautiful, freezing cold morning. It's said that it was like 0 feels like -1 overnight, but it felt way colder. I've camped in those temperatures a few times, and yeah, it felt a lot more brisk than that. For now, I'm gonna have my coffee and then get started with my day. It is freezing cold. It's 2 in the afternoon. I came in the tent for a little nap. Everything is ice cold. Like every single thing I touch is just ice. Oh my god. It's supposed to be -4, feels like -7 overnight. All of the rain from last night and overnight hasn't gone anywhere. Why are you so cute, Hero? Why are you just the cutest? I headed back to Rock Lake to finish up over there. I took some general photos of the Rock Lake campground, and then I did a walkthrough of Campground B for the GoPro footage. This was one of the only times during the entire trip that the sun decided to make an appearance, and it was pretty lovely. I actually got quite warm in all of my layers. It was nice. Let's go. Good girl. After finishing at Rock Lake, I met up with Dan and we went to buy some firewood. On the way back to Mew Lake, I drove slowly hoping to spot wildlife. We saw a few cars pulled over at the side of the highway, so I pulled over with the hope that there was a moose. And indeed there was. We caught the very tail end of a bull-moose encounter. The bull was in the water, snacking on some vegetation before walking off, away from the highway. Apparently, there was an entire family of moose in the same spot earlier that day. It was Dan's first moose sighting in over a decade, so he was really happy about it. It was my third moose sighting of that season alone, but I was also very happy about it. Who isn't very happy when they see moose? Are you on guard for us? You're the watchdog with your new jacket? You're a good girl, Ela. Yeah, you're a good girl. After we finished all of our firewood, I realized it was my last night in Algonquin Park for the season, and it would be my last opportunity to stargaze. I wasn't ready to get into my tent. We drove to Cache Lake and Canoe Lake to watch the stars, and then made one final destination to Canis Bay Lake to watch the moonrise. We arrived at Canis Bay Lake at the perfect time. The moment we walked to the beach, the moon started to rise. The clear Milky Way and starry sky slowly started to disappear as the moon rose higher in the sky. It was already at the peak cold temperature of -7, but it was worth staying outside in the freezing cold for those amazing views. In order to tolerate the freezing cold temperatures, I decided to go for another morning drive and enjoy the heat from my car. I went back to Canis Bay Lake Campground and Opeonga Road. Afterwards, I picked up Dan from our campsite and we went back to the place where we saw the moose, hoping to see it again. We didn't have any luck with the moose, but we did get to watch a busy beaver in the water. It was a quirky little beaver. It It was making funny movements while scratching itself clean, with its bright orange teeth puckering out in open view.
Yeah, this one. Here. Good girl. Good girl. Oh, that's okay. I'm coming. I'm coming.
After a quick nap in the tent, I went back to Lake of Two Rivers to finish documenting the campground. Dan was already there making progress on the section that he was working on. With more than 200 campsites in the campground, it was a very time-consuming, multi-day initiative. But we were able to finish and document every single campsite. I didn't have time to do the GoPro walkthrough though. That would unfortunately have to wait until another time. In total, Dan and I had documented more than 400 campsites during this one trip. I was constantly complaining about the cold the entire trip, but mostly in a joking way. It was part of the fun, and it made it easier to tolerate. The reality was, if I didn't want to be there, I wouldn't have been. Even with all of my insulation and layers, having the proper warmth for my car was pretty crucial. Dan and I decided that even though it technically wasn't the winter season, this definitely counted as winter camping. Elo seemed fine with the temperature. She didn't show any signs of discomfort, and since she can't speak English, I'm still working on that, she wasn't able to complain about the weather like I did. My insulated pop-up kennel cocoon idea definitely made a difference inside of the tent. One of the highlights was the wildlife. For 3 days, it was pretty amazing. 2 fox, 1 bull moose, multiple grouse, geese, birds, a raccoon, a beaver, and more. The overall scenery was definitely a highlight too. The frost-covered mornings showed me a side of Algonquin Park that I had never seen before. This trip was a great way to end my 2023 camping season.